You're listening to Wellnow, Slate's podcast on health and wellness. I'm Kavita Patel.
And I'm Maya Feller. The topic of gut health continues to trend across social media and on grocery store shelves. I mean, with good reason. So our gut has a very real and significant impact on our whole body health. Research about the gut microbiome has exploded over the past decade, and hundreds of supplements and tinctures and powders can be purchased with this promise of, quote unquote, enhancing its bacterial composition and overall health. So I called my colleague, Dr. Valerie Anton Gustav, who is a gastroenterologist, because I wanted to ask her how she thinks about and defines the gut microbiome. And this is what she said to me, Kavita. She said, it's a collection of bacteria and sometimes fungi that live in the human digestive system. Each individual has their own immune system and their own microbiome. And there are a lot of different functions that include helping with digestion, the immune system, and protection. And we just don't know enough about it. So, Kavita, how does gut health come into play with your work as an internist?
I mean, I would just say the short answer is that it doesn't. We don't have enough time to probably probe the way I think either specialists or potentially dietitians or others can into it. So we often say, like, for example, that especially dealing with GI disorders, we, one, referring to people like your colleague, but then also two, to kind of say, like, take a food log, because there's probably a lot that is related to what you're eating, and that, of course, affects the microbiome. I do think that there has not also been enough of what I would call connection in the literature. In medicine, we often describe that when something appears in a peer-reviewed publication, it can take on average 20 years for it to become common practice. So if you can imagine that the research around the gut microbiome, as you state, exploded over the past decade, we're still probably at least a decade behind that being introduced into kind of the common clinical environment. And I think that reflects what I would see in primary care, but it's definitely an important topic. It's also one that I think a lot more patients and people in general are kind of walking into the office asking about, because it has received a lot of attention. But I am curious, Maya, because I've had these kind of probably wrong or right, I've had these notions that this is heavily a part of your work, but is that true?
Oh, Kavita, you're completely right. It is heavily involved in our work. It's interesting because some people come to the practice with this very rudimentary understanding of how the gut microbiome might have an impact on their health, while others have only heard or read health claims, and they don't actually know how to tease out what information is valuable versus what information they should actually just let go. And the thing that is interesting is that I'd say both of those camps are not 100% clear about what food and nutrition behaviors they should engage in and for how long to actually be supportive of their own gut health. What I see with patients is that they'll go to incredibly great lengths in the pursuit of quote unquote good health, and they'll follow trends that may or may not be actually helpful, like drinking prebiotic sodas that are marketed as better for you. Things like that really are not meaningful. And we don't know how often our patients are showing up having engaged in those behaviors.
Yeah, Maya, there was just in the past months a class action lawsuit filed against Poppi, which is a functional prebiotic soda type beverage, saying exactly what you were alluding to, that it promised to improve gut health and it was an alternative to kind of sodas.
The popular soda Poppi markets itself good for the gut. Its slogan, beat gut happy, beat gut healthy. But that may not be so, or at least a lawsuit alleges. A San Francisco woman has filed a class action lawsuit against the soda company. She says the drinks do not contain enough prebiotic fiber to cause meaningful health benefits from consuming just one can. Poppi drinks contain only around 2 grams of prebiotic agave inulin fiber.
I do think that this is one in a probably streak of these like misleading health claims. We see this a lot, by the way, with different types of food products, as you've pointed out. And I think it just preys on the vulnerability of kind of, I'll call myself an average shopper, average consumer. You're going into the grocery store, you're trying to make choices. And then I will say in particular, Poppi, I've noticed, and I actually stopped and remembered kind of thinking, well, if this is better than, my kids don't drink soda, we try to limit any soda intake, period. But if this is like a better alternative and it's good for my children and good for me, well, maybe I should pay I can't tell you how expensive these cans of soda were. One can was priced anywhere from $1.50 to $3, which is incredible, an 8-ounce, 10-ounce serving. So it's just kind of a disgusting controversy, just a practice that is against anything that I would hold authentic or true, to tell people that this has, one, a health claim, and then two, to do this incredible markup for profit. I know, Maya, you've been out in the media, you've been trying to draw attention to what is real, what is not real. How do you react to, what I just think is outrageous, but unfortunately all too common?
Oh, it's so common. Even I have fallen prey to things. Within the last month, I received a quote unquote fiber supplement that actually physically sent me over the edge because I was sampling it. And I'm a dietitian and I'm someone who, in theory, understands how to read a nutrition facts label and also the ingredient list. And I didn't do my due diligence. And I was pretty sick for a few weeks because of it. So imagine, this is my experience, and I just think about my patients and average consumers. Like, this is, there's so much confusion about what's really helpful. Well, we could go on and on. However, I think I know the perfect person to have this conversation with. After the break, we'll bring in Colin Hill to help better understand the gut microbiome and break down what we know and what is yet to be discovered.
Hey, Wellnow listeners, if you're enjoying the show and want to hear more, subscribe to our feed. New episodes come out every Wednesday morning. While you're there, check out our other episodes too, like last week's, when we had a powerful conversation with Dr. Mike Dow and his new show with actor and comedian Nick Cannon about men's mental health. You don't want to miss it. Whether you're off to the pool, hiking, or traveling this summer, you're bringing your microbiome with you too. The 38 trillion bacteria that live in and on you, especially your gut, are essential to whole body health. Seed's DS-01 Daily Symbiotic is a 24-strain probiotic and prebiotic that benefits your gut, skin, and heart health in just 2 capsules a day. Probiotics and prebiotics work best when used consistently, like other routine health habits, like getting in your daily walk or eating enough fruits and veggies. You have to stay consistent to see benefits. If you're looking to start or maintain your whole body health journey, Seed is a great product to try. Support your gut this summer with Seed's DS-01 Daily Symbiotic. Go to seed.com/wellnow and use code 25wellnow to get 25% off your first month. That's 25% off your first month of Seed's DS-01 Daily Symbiotic at seed.com/wellnow. Code 25wellnow.
Female athletes have always needed grit and talent. But for decades, they've also needed a certificate
to prove that they were actually women, according to different definitions.
And even now, they're still being checked and questioned. Their story is the newest podcast series from CBC and NPR's Embedded. It's called Tested. Listen now.
Welcome back. You're listening to Well Now from Slate. I'm Kavita Patel.
And I'm Maya Feller. So here to help us dive even deeper to the importance of having a healthy gut microbiome is Dr. Colin Hill. He is a professor of microbiology at APC Microbiome Ireland. Kavita, I actually met Colin at a conference earlier this year in the UK, and I thought that he really needed to be on the show to have a conversation with us. So Colin, thank you so much for joining us on Well Now. I'm really glad we were able to make this work.
Oh, it's great to meet you again, Maya, and I'm delighted to be on the program and talk about one of my favorite topics, the gut microbiome.
Colin, we love to start our conversations with a very basic question. How do you define wellness?
Yeah, I mean, the easy answer is that wellness is just simply the absence of disease. But of course, that just begs the question of what's disease and what can be considered disease. So I think wellness is almost a mental state. It's almost an acceptance and a satisfaction or contentment with the state of health you find yourself in. And if you're comfortable and happy with your physical health and your mental health, then to me that's a definition of wellness. You could have a disease and still actually be well balanced in your life and have a very happy life and a very well life. So I think defining health shouldn't be the absence of things, it should be the presence of things.
You've been involved in a lot of significant research around the gut microbiome. What do we currently know about it?
What if I take you back 1 billion years and say that any alien coming to planet Earth 1 billion years ago, reporting back to their masters, would have said it's a microbial planet. Yet another microbial planet, probably, but it's a microbial planet. There's a few big things wandering around. Dinosaurs, maybe, but well, not 1 billion years ago. They won't last very long, but the microbes are here to stay. And an alien visiting today would say the exact same thing. It's a microbial planet. And so we evolved, and plants and animals and every large thing you can see evolved into a world where microbes dominated, where microbes ruled every single niche and environment. So we essentially entered into this world in partnership with those microbes. We didn't just shrug them off and replace them or get rid of them. We're not evolutionary descendants, if you like, of these microbes. We evolved to accept the fact that we live in a microbial world. And every surface of our body is covered by these microbes. When you say surface of the body, most people think of skin. But in fact, our guts and our lungs and our urogenital tracts, these are actually on the surface of our body. They face... Sometimes they face inwards, but they face things that we ingest, things that we breathe in, things that we do. And so these are surfaces, and these are entirely populated by microbes. So it would be extraordinary if we evolved in a way that we just simply ignored them and they ignored us. So that hasn't happened. We speak the same kind of chemical languages. Microbes produce serotonin and acetylcholine and tryptophan and things that are brain chemicals. In fact, of course, as we evolved, we said, we need a chemical to signal between neurons. Let's take one of those bacterial ones that already exist. We didn't make up a new one in many cases. And so we speak the same chemical language. We live in extraordinarily close proximity with one another. And it's only very recently we've begun to appreciate that and accept that these microbes almost certainly play a role in health and wellness. So that's the microbiome. Every environment on Earth has a microbiome. Here, of course, we're talking about the human microbiome and primarily the gut microbiome, which is where I work and where the vast majority of these microbes are located.
Colin, how does the human kind of gut microbiome develop exactly? Just to your point about there's so many kind of environmental factors, but then the gut microbiome, obviously, from what you put inside your body. But can you explain for listeners a little bit more about how it develops?
I always say that every single individual has the microbiome they deserve. And what I mean by that is they've got the microbiome that is a product of their life to that point. And that begins, of course, at birth. It's generally accepted now. There's still some controversy, but it's generally accepted that the fetus itself is sterile. But as the baby is being born, it picks up microbes immediately. The second the amniotic sac ruptures, microbes flood in and start to colonize the newborn baby. And so whether you're born by standard vaginal delivery or C-section, that already has an impact on what kind of microbiome you'll have. Most of your microbiome you pick up from your mom at birth. And then that microbiome starts to develop from the second you're born until the day you die. And that will be influenced by drivers. And some of the drivers will be genetics, your own genetics, dictating the kind of conditions within your own gut, for example, or on your skin. Diet is an enormous influencer of what your microbiome will look like. And as you go from breastfeeding to weaning, the microbiome changes very dramatically in response to those changes in diets. Disease states will affect your microbiome, whether you live with animals, whether you live with other people, or whether you live by yourself, what area of the world you live in. All of these things will push and shape the microbiome until you end up with, as I said, the microbiome you deserve, the microbiome that you created for yourself up to this point. In a perfect world, that microbiome is assisting you to have a healthy life. There may be instances, regrettably, where your microbiome may be pushing you away from that optimal health and towards disease. And so the microbiome has two aspects to it. These are microbes, and the microbes are out for themselves, essentially. The microbes live in your gut because you provide them with nutrients. You provide them with a warm, safe environment for them to thrive. But if they get an opportunity to spread into your bloodstream and they can grow in your bloodstream, they'll do it. They don't have any ethics or any thought process about whether this is a good or a bad idea. They'll just simply do it. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but basically your microbiome is shaped, and your microbiome is different from mine. Your microbiome is different from mine. They could be incredibly different, but still healthy for all three of us, or they could be very similar, but healthy in me and not healthy in you. So, it's been a huge problem for the microbiome field. It's this most simple question of all: what's a healthy microbiome? And we don't have great answers for that.
We know that your zip code can determine how long you live because there's so many environmental factors. You've done a study in the past that talks about the difference in gut bacteria depending on where you live. Can you just make a comment about that or some of the findings from that study?
You're absolutely right. I mean, where you live can, of course, simply tell you more about your local health system than anything else. But usually people who live in different environments, and we've looked at people throughout the lifespan, but people who, for example, move into care facilities, their microbiomes will change, not because they're being maltreated in any way or anything like that, but simply because their environment has suddenly shrunk. Maybe their food sources have kind of shrunk a bit. Maybe the food is even safer. It's more processed because they're trying to protect people because their immune systems might be in decline. So your microbiome is enormously dependent. When you go to people who live in the Amazonian forests and things, we see very, very different microbiomes than we see in people who live in urban, modern conditions who've had antibiotics throughout their lives at various points. That's exactly what you'd predict, and it's exactly what you find. It doesn't mean, oh, wouldn't it be great if we could all have the Amazonians' microbiotas in us? Again, we have the ones we deserve, and we've selected those.
Colin, that's so interesting that you say that, because when you were saying that, my initial was, yeah, wouldn't that be great if we had the microbiome of the people living in the Amazon? And then you followed up and qualified and said, no, actually, you have the microbiome that you're meant to have. And I think, and at least I know I hear this from my patients, and I'm sure Kavita hears it from hers as well, is, well, what can we do to influence our microbiome? And can we actually influence it?
Yes, I mean, influencing our microbiome in a way is quite trivial. Impacting it in a way that's beneficial to you, now that's the harder part of the game. If you change your diet significantly, if you up your fiber intake, your microbiome will change. If you lower your fiber intake, your microbiome will change. If you shift from a carnivorous or omnivorous diet to a vegetarian diet or a vegan diet, your microbiome will change. Your microbiome is reactive, if you like, to what you're putting into it. It's exactly as you'd imagine. If you have a high-performing car and you put different types of fuel into it, it will perform differently. But we've known from nutritionists what a good diet looks like. And, you might expect this, but the more diverse diets, more plants, more fibers give you more diverse microbiomes. And about the only thing that most microbiome scientists will agree on is greater diversity is better. Greater diversity gives you greater abilities to react to changes. It means you're more equipped to deal with if one microbe gets knocked out by an antibiotic, another one will take up that function. So if diversity is your goal, then follow the kind of dietitians and nutritionists advice that has been there for decades. And it would be kind of extraordinary if the advice that we've known for years makes you healthier was not the same advice that makes your microbiome healthier. Your microbiome, a colleague of mine described it in a paper a few years back as a virtual organ, an organ that you're not born with, that you acquire at birth. And it's one that we have a lot more control over maybe than other organs, but it's one that we need to look after. And the best way to look after it is the same way we look after our other organs: diverse, varied diet, plenty of vegetables, plenty of greens. Exercise does better for your microbiome than a lack of exercise. Absence of drugs, less alcohol, all the things that you would have been preaching, I'm sure, to patients for decades, all hold true for the microbiomes. That's the good news. You don't have to change your advice because of the microbiome.
That's good to hear, because it's true. It does feel like it's the same thing. But, honestly, even though we know kind of the right thing to do, Colin, it's still so hard to do it. And I think a lot of it has to do with the built environment. There are just so many reasons to not think about the health. It's easier to take on unhealthy behaviors. It's cheaper. there's so many factors. So that brings up challenges on the research side. You alluded to one of them, like, people want to kind of have a standardized definition of the microbiome, but it's as unique as a fingerprint or a retinal scan. What are some of the other challenges that you and your colleagues have faced when you're trying to study the gut microbiome?
Again, this might seem trivial, but access. We don't have access to the gut microbiome. What we have access to is fecal material from people, and we can analyze that. But, fecal material is a rich source of information about what's happening in the gut. But the gut, as you well know, is a very long organ and a very complicated organ with lots of different anatomical regions within that organ. And so the fecal microbiome may not be giving us a good sense of what's in the upper GI tract, or what's in the distal colon versus the mid colon, or what's actually up against the mucosal wall of the intestine that's interacting with our immune system and our enteric nervous system. And the ones that we find in the feces, these are the ones that have, in one kind of way, been ejected by the microbiome. They're on their way out. They're not the ones that are perhaps the most active at any given time. So access is a problem, and we can't ask people to give us biopsies or to undergo constant colonoscopies and things just to get samples. So literally, we're looking at a proxy. We're looking at a blurry kind of picture of what was happening maybe hours or even in some cases days earlier in the colon. So that's a really big challenge.
Yeah, and an important one. Well, this is fascinating. I have so many more questions. I know Maya does too. But we're going to take a brief break here. When we come back, we'll hear more from Dr. Colin Hill on the gut microbiome.
Hi, I'm Josh Levine, one of the hosts of Slate's weekly sports show, Hang Up and Listen. Every Monday, I'm joined by Joel Anderson, who you might know from Slate's Slow Burn podcast, and Stefan Fatsis. This summer, we'll be diving into the Paris Olympics, watching Simone Biles, Sha'Carri Richardson, and Victor Wembanyama, obsessing over track, team handball, and breakdancing, and talking about the Olympic Committee's Russia ban and sex testing in elite sports. Check out Hang Up and Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to Well Now from Slate. I'm Kavita Patel.
I'm Maya Feller. We're continuing our conversation with Colin Hill, getting the facts about your gut microbiome.
Colin, before the break, we spoke about some of the challenges that you face as a researcher in studying the microbiome. And we also know, just as you've pointed out, how kind of intrinsic the gut microbiome is to other aspects of health. Can you just tell us what we know? Because there has been a great deal of research, much of which you've contributed to, about how the gut microbiome is linked to various aspects of health.
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. Of course, that's at the heart of all of the research we do, is trying to understand mechanism. Unfortunately, until now, a lot of microbiome science is kind of observational. We can see that the microbiome is different in people with a particular disease or health state. And we can, even in animal models, recreate some of those. We can take, the microbiome from an obese individual, give it to a lean mouse, and that mouse will start to become obese. That you can transfer function. What we don't know is yet, in many cases, is which precise microorganisms are doing that, or is it a community effect? Would you only get these results with large communities? And just to give you a sense of what I'm talking about when I talk about complex communities, we have about 10 to the 14 bacteria in the human gut. It's one with 14 zeros afterwards, which is easy to say, but it's an enormous number. And they are composed of maybe up to 1,000 different bacterial species. So the analysis of the microbiome is extremely complex. I mean, what we normally do is we take a sample and we sequence every piece of DNA in that sample, and then we assign those pieces of DNA back to different microbes and thereby build a picture of what microbes were present. Another upside to that is by reading what's on those pieces of DNA, we can get a good sense of what those microbes are capable of doing, because if you know what genes they have, you can get a sense of their potential things they can produce. But what we think happens, of course, is that the microbes live in very close contact with our enteric nervous system, and so they communicate with the brain. We've got the brain-gut axis. They interact with our immune cells, and they train the immune system. They train the immune system to make sure that it doesn't react to food proteins, for example, but do react to a new virus appearing that we want a good immune response to. They increase the barrier function of our gut. They make sure our gut produces lots of mucus and that the cells are tightly bound together to protect us from bacteria crossing that barrier and getting into our bloodstreams. So they interact with us in many different ways. I suppose largely you could say they increase our defense systems against invasion by pathogens and viruses and things like that.
Colin, when I hear this, I recognize that there is a complexity that is sometimes lost in the US. And I know that the regulations in the EU are very, very different when we talk about health claims and functional foods and beverages. So this brings me to something that has been going on recently here in the US. A consumer in California filed a class action lawsuit against a functional probiotic beverage company. And what they said was that the health claims were misleading. You talked about this complexity. What do you make of these things that happen here in the US where, companies are popping up with a functional beverage saying this is going to change your gut microbiome or influence it in some way?
Yeah, obviously, most scientists are very concerned about things like that. The crossover between scientific data and scientific interpretation and then marketing is a very dangerous little gap. The way science works is somebody proposes something, a hypothesis, says, maybe bacteria are involved in a particular disease state or a health state. And what we should do is test that. And you test it and you get a positive result. And you publish that, but then someone else retests it and someone else tests it and someone else tests it and someone else. And over maybe the next decade, you start to get, well, okay, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It seems to be dependent on this and that and the other. But of course, if on the very first experiment, someone just runs off saying, okay, this works, I'm going to build a product and roll that product out. Meanwhile, the science has caught up and said, well, actually, it wasn't as straightforward. You might think, well, the science got it wrong. But that's not wrong for science. In a weird way, it's not wrong for science to be wrong. What's wrong is if science doesn't self-correct itself, and it almost always does. But sometimes those early discoveries, those exciting discoveries that generate interest, people run away with them a little bit and maybe develop products that we need more maturity. We need very good regulatory systems. As a fundamental scientist, I get frustrated by regulators sometimes. They seem to say no to everything, but that's their job. They need to make sure that if we're going to put a health claim on something, it really needs to be rigorous and it needs to stand up. It can't be just, there was that one paper that said, probiotics will work in Alzheimer's disease or something. So now let's stick good for Alzheimer's on every yogurt pot. It can't be that trivial. But there is a gap there that we need to bridge somehow with good ethical science.
I would agree wholeheartedly. I know that you've done a great deal of work around helping folks to understand the importance of this type of regulation. And as you said earlier, there's a real difference between what we know has an impact on the gut microbiome, all those recommendations around eating more fruits and vegetables, engaging in intentional physical activity, and then things that are, I would say, dubious, right? And maybe glom on to one kind of part of science and then run with it to the extreme. What are some of your recommendations? Like when you are thinking about what we should be saying to people who are considering prebiotics, postbiotics, synbiotics?
I would start with quite a simple question of what is it you are trying to achieve? What is it you're trying to address? Why do you think it might be worth your while to spend more money than you currently spend? And normally, you want some benefit. If you have IBS, or if you have allergies, or you're worried about your cognitive ability, or there's something specific, then of course, and it's so easy to say in a podcast or sitting in my office here, you should go and research the literature. You should go and find out which probiotic has the best evidence in your condition. How often should that probiotic be taken? What is the level of evidence? How compelling is it? Talk to your health providers. I can give all that advice very easily, but of course people don't often follow that advice. They're desperate. They have problems they want to solve and they want solutions. And they hear about something and they just go and buy it. But unfortunately, that longer road is the right road. If you've IBS or you've a particular condition, you have to go and find out, well, which probiotic is best recognized for having an effect in that condition. And then use that exact probiotic, not one that sounds like it or one that contains maybe the same bacterial species, but literally the one for which the health benefit has been shown. But I recognize I'm up in an ivory tower here saying this, and people are on the ground in a supermarket trying to pick a supplement. And it's not easy, again, to bridge that divide.
I mean, Colin, I think that this is really sound and thoughtful advice, because this is part of what the challenges are in the now that we all are experiencing. How do we navigate and think about our health? I do want to ask you if you would just define for our listeners, what is a prebiotic, what is a probiotic, and then do post for us.
Yeah, a prebiotic, it's a fiber or a sugar or anything that you ingest that the human body itself cannot absorb and digest, but that your gut microbiome can in a selective way. Now, let's suppose you gave somebody a fiber which the human cannot digest, but bifidobacteria within the gut can digest. Then what you're doing is you're promoting the growth of bifidobacteria selectively. It's not the entire microbiome is just enjoying the fact that you've eaten this fiber. Bifidobacteria and a few others are specifically benefiting. And to show why that is, or where that's important, is you can think of mother's milk. Mother's milk contains lots of sugars, prebiotics, that the baby cannot digest. Now you think, why has evolution made human mothers produce sugars in their milk for their baby that their baby can't digest? So it tells us the importance of selectively feeding the right microbes in your gut. So that's prebiotics. But you can get prebiotics in lots of food sources. You don't have to go out and buy expensive supplements or anything. Lots of foods are high in prebiotics, particularly, as I said, foods with high fiber. Then probiotics are a very, very different thing. They are live bacteria or yeast, but very often bacteria, that you've grown in a factory or in a food plant, and you're ingesting alive. And these live bacteria are having a beneficial impact on your health. A probiotic, the term is reserved for those bacteria for which a health benefit has been proven, not imagined or predicted or suggested, or a first cousin of that bacteria works, so why wouldn't this one? But an actual microbe that has been tested and shown to have a health benefit. The term probiotic in legal terms is not restricted to that, but in scientific terms it is restricted to that. Then a symbiotic is where you take a pre and a probiotic simultaneously. Now you might say that's, belts and braces, why not? But they can either be that the prebiotic is deliberately designed to feed the probiotic that you're co-administering, so that you give the probiotic a better chance of kind of establishing itself and delivering on its health benefit. Or it could be that the prebiotic is feeding the bifidobacteria in your gut, which is good, and the probiotic is delivering a separate health benefit, which is good. So they don't necessarily have to work together, but they're taken together. That's a symbiotic. And then probably the newest kid on the block, and the one that's, I suppose, is counterintuitive in a way, is postbiotic. And a postbiotic is an inanimate microbe, a microbe that has been killed. So it's no longer alive, but it still has a health benefit. And that's the caveat that still is there, that it has to have a demonstrated health benefit to be called a postbiotic. And maybe the benefit of a postbiotic is dosing. If you give a postbiotic, that's all you're ever going to take. It can't grow in your gut. It can't set up residence in your gut. They don't have the same shelf life concerns, the same viability concerns and things. So that's the kind of family of biotics. Some of them are aimed at the microbiome, at improving your microbiome, changing composition of your microbiome, and prebiotics especially are aimed at that. But some are aimed directly at your immune system or your enteric nervous system or your gut barrier defense, and they may have impacts in that way.
That was an incredible masterclass in all those definitions, because to be honest, Colin, it does feel like there's all these claims and then they'll put a label and you don't really know how to take into consideration or evaluate a product. So thank you. And maybe we can actually tap into a little bit of what goes on when you're sitting with some of your colleagues. And I know that we mentioned that you and Maya met at a conference. When you think about the kind of cutting edge or the future of like the relationship between the gut microbiome and other health factors, what are you looking forward to? What's on the horizon for the future of the microbiome?
I think the greatest challenge is really understanding the function of individual microbiomes, not just simply having a kind of a catalog of who's there, but knowing what they're doing. So it's becoming reasonably easy now to take a fecal sample from somebody or a biopsy and sequence everything in it and establish pretty effectively who's there. What we don't know is exactly what are they doing, what systems they've switched on, which ones have they switched off, how are they reacting to their environment, what are they doing to our diet, what are they doing to our tissue cells, how are we interacting with them. And incredibly bright people are looking at that using AI technology, using advanced computational biology, modeling. So I think we're getting to a much closer to a point where we will be able to actually predict that given your genome, which we can sequence as well, and given your diet and lifestyle, and given your microbiome, we can start to actually stratify people into what would benefit them more. People are even starting to develop digital twins so you have a digital twin which includes evidence of your microbiome. So we could almost play out a particular dietary intervention on your digital twin before we come back and try it on you. So it's a really exciting area, one that's far too complex for an old guy like me to get involved in now. We're going to stick with the biology, but that's the really exciting area for microbiome science, I think.
As we close out, we'd love to hear any parting advice or thoughts that you would want to share with our listeners.
What I would encourage people is consider your microbiome. If you were to be offered something, a food or an exercise regime or something where someone said, oh, by the way, this is going to damage your liver, you'd immediately say, well, then I'm not doing that. That's crazy. Why would I do something that will damage my liver? Consider it. Do I want to eat junk food all day? That's going to negatively impact on my microbiome. My microbiome is important to me. It's an organ. Even if it's only a mental device for thinking about your overall health, your kind of holistic health, consider, do you need to do things that could potentially damage your microbiome? Your microbiome is your microbial counterpart, your friend, your partner through life. Only damage it if you really have to, would be my advice. Your microbiome is your friend. Look after it.
Colin Hill is a professor of microbiology at APC Microbiome Ireland. Colin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
That's our show this week. wellnow is produced by Vic Whitley-Berry with help from Kristie Taiwo-Makanjuola. Ben Richmond is Slate's Senior Director of Podcast Operations. Alicia Montgomery is Vice President of Audio.
We'd love to hear from you. Email us at wellnow@slate.com. If you want to support this show, please consider becoming a Slate Plus member. You'll get to listen to this show ad-free, as well as hear bonus material from some of your other favorite Slate podcasts, like Slow Burn and Amicus. You'll also have full access to all articles on Slate's website. And be sure to tune in next Wednesday as we tackle another part of the wellness industry. I'm Maya Feller.
And I'm Kavita Patel. Thanks for listening.